Deep and meaningful conversations to connect, find calm, feel empowered, and uncover clarity. Welcome to the Death, Dying, Diagnosis and Doulas podcast.
Welcome Helen Callanan from Preparing the Way. So looking forward to talk to us today about dying at home, because I think it's such a you can add so much value to people just to hear that a lot of people do in fact die at home these days, but sometimes it's a bit of a mindset piece and an information piece to get to that if you want to, but to do that. So I just thought it would be fantastic if we just focus this whole discussion around that, and just because I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are going to be really interested. So first up, Helen, just for those that don't know you, so tell us a little bit about you. I know you're an end-of-life doula, but what else do you do?
So I also am the Managing Director and Lead Educator for Preparing the Way, End-of-Life Doula Training. So not only am I one, but I also train others, and we do that across Australia and New Zealand, and it's my grand passion. I'm also a natural therapist practitioner. I'm a Reiki master and teacher and practitioner. And, for me, doulaing has become all-consuming. I just think, what you just said there about people wanting to die at home, it's so true, and it is absolutely an education piece. It can be done, but there's often a lot of obstacles in the way that can be overcome if people have enough information. The stats are that 80% of people say they want to die at home, but only 20% get to achieve that. Now, that's quite a big disparity there. So I think that's worth exploring 100%.
Absolutely. And I'm sure some of that is, things might be just taken out of people's control. And so I'm sure there are some instances where, people are in ICU or there's things that happen and it just can't be managed. But I really think that 80% to 20%, there's a very big gap in there of people that really could be dying at home, but they're not. And
yes.
So what do you think those reasons are? So you've got somebody that, like me, for instance, it says, I really want to die at home in my own bed with my family and pets around me. What would be the things that would make that difficult for me to achieve?
Well, a few things, Jules, and I just firstly want to back up a bit and say you're absolutely right. There are times that someone's, if you like, their medical needs may be such that they really have to be in the hospital or intensive care environment. And there are still people who are under heavy medication and heavy medical intervention and care, and they still want to go home. And I've actually been in a situation where a person really wanted to go home, and they were told by the doctors, no, if you go home, you'll probably die on the way home in the ambulance. And they were like, okay. It was just like, I just don't want to die here. I want, even if they're being on the way home was enough for them.
Yeah.
So that can be just partly mindset. So getting back to what can get in the way, there's a number of things, Jules. Sometimes it can be who is around. Because if someone's going to die at home, they need support. They're going to need their care needs are likely to increase, right, as they're approaching their end of their life. So to have, often there's one primary caregiver, maybe two, and that might be the partner or the wife or the child or the whoever, is someone around, and that's fine, but they can't do that 24/7, week in, week out. So, one of the things, there was this great piece of research done by Western Sydney University back in 2015, and it was called End of Life at Home. And they did a lot of research around people who did die at home and what it took and what the gaps were. And one of the things they came out with was a stat that said the average number of people you need around you in your network to die at home is around 16, average 16. So now that's not including doctors and nurses. We're talking here what they call the informal network, our family, our friends, maybe our church group, our community group, maybe our colleagues from work, whatever our organization and the groups we belong to, and our family and friends and the grandkids so you need this tribe, around you, this group, because and I say to families that I work with, absolutely, we'll sort this for you if that's what you want, that's your preference. But what we need to do is go, okay, who's in the network? Who is here that can actually, be here and support this person? I say to people, I recommend that you have a minimum of 2 people available for your full-time care around the clock, and not the same 2 people.
Yep.
So it's almost like you have shifts. Often what I feel like I am is a bit of as an end-of-life doula, is a bit of a team manager or event manager, because we've got this event happening, a pressured, sacred event, and we need to make sure we've got the right people in place at the right time, the right resources. So it's about network primarily. Another thing too is there in this community, is there the right or sufficient community support for home-based end-of-life care or palliative care? So does your council where you live have a palliative care unit that does community work? Some don't. Our rural areas, they don't have anything palliative. So again, it's about what are the resources in the area where the person is, and accessing those early as you can, putting plans in place, making sure that you've got as much resource around you. There's a great website called Gather My Crew, CREW, gathermycrew.org. It might have an AU on the end, I'm not sure. And it's basically a calendar. There's so much to do. There's meals to prepare, there's the dogs to walk, there's appointments to go to. So to have a calendar where you can say to your friends and family, okay, get on this calendar, it's on a website, all of the things we need managed are there. Can you pick which ones you can do and what times? So also having someone coordinate a list of people who are like, I really want to help, I've got my hand up, what can I do? So there are a couple of the primary things: network of people, resources, and home-based palliative care, because the majority of people, not everybody, but the majority of people will need some level of palliative medical and nursing care.
Yeah, fair enough. What about equipment, Helen? I suppose some people might need things like hospital beds and, shower chairs and things like that. So in your experience, where do people get their hands on some of this equipment?
Yeah, well, when a person, let's say a person has been having treatment, right, and they're either aging or they're dying of some illness, they've got a life-limiting illness or terminal illness, and they may be associated with a hospital, and that hospital may have a social worker, may have, an occupational therapist as part of the team of the PAL care unit. They might have a community base. So sometimes you can resource it through there, right? Through those contacts. The other thing, and I've done this for myself, for both for clients and also my own family that I've been taking care of at home. I lived with my dad at home the last 2 months of his life, took care of him 24/7 with help. And but we hired a hospital bed and an air mattress, which is great. It creates these ripples of air so a person isn't getting as prone to pressure sores. We got a wheelchair, we had an overbed table like you do, and we had all that set up in the lounge room. Yeah, so that it was ease of access. And then we had the PAL care team coming in as often. It was once a day in the end. But it just depends on what the needs are. Yeah.
And really, if for me, if I look at the big picture of that, for the health system, it must be cheaper to keep people at home. And I don't mean, because obviously I love the choice that people make, but you would think that the health system would be 100% behind that, to keep people out of hospital beds and expensive care and equipment, if you can manage at home with some hired pieces of equipment. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah, It absolutely does. And unfortunately, you know, you'd be surprised at sometimes the resistance from within the medical model to people going home that the family, you know, won't be able to manage. And I think, you know, to me, it's about support. It's all about support. And medical and nursing support is critical. The majority of people, as they're approaching it, need that. Right. And if you can get it at home, and you've got the support, like there's nurse on call now, for example, you can ring up. A lot of the PAL care units, someone I'm working with at the moment, their local PAL care unit comes and visits them, but they can ring the PAL care ward anytime they want and get advice. This is happening, that's happening. Should I give you more medication? Shouldn't I? They can get advice, right? So all of that's there. But I think, you know, one of the crucial pieces of the puzzle is where a family or a person or whoever's supporting people are able to get the support of that medical team to do this at home. And it's critical. It absolutely takes the burden off the medical system, and especially in COVID, Julie, with all of these restrictions, to have people dying unsupported by their family and friends because of COVID restrictions. I understand they're trying to keep people safe. I get it. However, it breaks people's hearts and it causes a lot of other associated mental health stuff, guilt, you know, real anxiety that they can't be taking care of their person. I've helped people literally break them out of aged care and get them home to care for them, right? Yeah. Because they want to be with their person. And the truth is, as someone is approaching really end of life and they're moving into what we call the active dying stage, and that's the final stage before death happens. And often a person is unresponsive during that time. And what that means is that they may be no longer interacting. They might be very quiet still. It's almost like they're sleeping a lot. Sometimes they're even considered what's in a coma. You know, there's a lot of support and care you can still provide at that time that doesn't need medical or nursing intervention. And as long as, you know, the person's pain is managed, you know, it's a time sometimes to go for the family and the people to go, you know what, now we're going to actually stop those treatments. We're going to stop that so that we're not interfering in this next part of their journey. You know, there's a lot of evidence now, research coming out about that there's a lot more happening in terms of consciousness of what's happening at end of life. It's not all about the medical. It's not a medical event, death.
No, it's not.
It's a very deeply personal and particularly family event. And so we need our doctors and our nurses, 100%. I couldn't do what I do without them.
Yeah.
And like, how do we focus on this being a family and home event?
Yeah, totally agree. So, you know, for anyone that really is thinking that's, you know, I've got a life-limiting thing, I know that I'm not going to be around much longer, I'm aging and I want to die at home, but they've tried to talk to their family about it, they feel the resistance, they feel the discomfort about it. How could you help them? Like, what strategies would you have for the person who wants to die at home when those around are like, no, we don't want to talk about it. We're not ready for you to die yet. We don't want to think about it, let alone talk about it. So what would you do?
Yeah, look, that's such a gosh, there's a whole podcast right there. So there's two things to that in my experience. One is, generally people don't want to talk about it, don't want to think about it. That's one scenario. The other scenario is they're saying no because they're terrified. They're terrified that they will hurt their person, or they won't do it right, or something will happen and they won't know what to do. And to me, it's all around education. And so going back to the first situation where people are like, no, we're not even going to deal with that, you're dying. You know, that to me is all can be often resolved in communication. And so as a doula, for example, I would find out the wishes of the person. Let's say it was you. What are your wishes? And then I would request to approach the family and talk to them and say, this is what, Julie is wanting. And so, I'd love to hear, tell me what's there for you about that. And, and just try and explore with them. Because sometimes, and you would know this yourself, it's just a part of being a human being. Sometimes when we get out of our mouth what our concerns and our fears are, we can actually see it differently. It's a bit of, as you said earlier, Joy, it's a bit of a mindset shift, right? And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's cultural too, Julie.
Yeah.
Different cultures approach end of life differently. So we've got to respect that as well.
Yeah.
But also it's in as individual, and as Jackie Morgan from Natural Grace says, and I love this statement of hers, is, as unique as we are in life, we are in our death. And it's so perfectly true. Then on the other hand, where you've got people who are like, oh my God, no, I couldn't possibly. I would then be talking to them about, so tell me all of the things that are your concerns, because that's what I would be here as an end-of-life doula, what I would support you in helping you, get you the information you need, get you the resources you need, be a link sometimes between the medical and the nursing world and the person and the family, because sometimes the language is like, what on earth are they talking about? And I can, if you like, simple it down so it can be understood. And I look, the biggest thing, Jules, and I'm so committed to this in the work I do and the education that we deliver at Preparing the Way, is, you're an individual and you have preferences and values and desires and wants and needs, and as do your family. My job as an end-of-life doula is to empower you to fulfill those. And my criteria is this: is it legal, and is it safe, and is it possible? And you know what? There's very few things that aren't that. So as long as we're doing that and everybody is safe, and that to me is part of my job, and that's safe emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, it's about helping people navigate the unknown.
Yeah.
We're most often frightened of what we don't understand or what we don't know. But when we know about it, I just had a situation recently where a person died, and quite unexpectedly and quite suddenly. His family were overseas. So I was sort of supporting his close group of friends to navigate this time. So people are in shock, people are upset. We've got to get them in from overseas, the family. They sent, and one of them actually spoke to me and said, I don't know what to do, and I don't even know, I can't cry. I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with you. And I said, well, let's think about it. At the moment, you've only heard something, right? You've been told that your person has died. It's not even real to you yet. So what we have to do is help people understand. So talk him through that. Then we arranged for them to go to the funeral directors where this person was being held, and looked after and cared for the deceased person. And then they then did an extraordinary job on talking the family through, this is what's happened, this is what we've done. When you go into the room, this is what you're going to see. And they went in, and honestly, it was miraculous. The difference between where they were and where they ended up a few days later, when we finally did a beautiful ceremony of celebrating this man's life, was remarkable. And it was all through conversation, education, communication, sharing, and room to explore their concerns and fears. It's not rocket science, Jules.
No, it's not. It's not. So I was just thinking about the fears that people have of dying at home. And for me, I imagine that it would be quite empowering. That sounds weird, but I mean, if I knew I was going to die in the next 6 months, I'd throw myself into it and say, what can I organise? What can I do? How can I make it so that it suits me? Whereas I know a lot of other people that would be scary and they wouldn't want to do that. But do you think that people that do have a say in how they die and where they die and what happens to them after they die in terms of, after death care, do you think that they feel empowered by that, or do you think they feel scared by that?
No, 100%. I started to say before that, each person has preferences and values and needs and wants, that my job as a doula is to help them achieve that. To me, you think about it, when we go, okay, this is happening in my life, right? Okay, I'm going to approach this and I'm going to think about it. I'm going to plan for it. I'm going to find out all the bits about it. That could be planning a holiday. It could be planning your retirement. It could be planning a birthday party. It's the same bloody principle, Jules, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's really where it's like, okay, this event is coming. And, that our job is about giving people back control, capacity, and choice. Because here's a fact, Julie, here's a fact, that as a person is either aging or approaching end of life through an illness or whatever, their control, their capacity, and their choices are either diminishing or being taken from them.
Yeah.
Big truth. So my thing is about, no, we've got to give that back to them, because you know what you want. And if you don't know, you can ask questions, you can explore, you can research, you can find out everything you want to know and make your choices. And then you can change them if you wanted to.
Sure.
It's not like it's set in stone.
Yeah.
Right? Because what you choose today, next month, you might, I just found out about this. I want to do that now.
I want to do that now. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, again, it's all about conversation, research, education. There's something that I teach is about here, particularly in the West, but we live life like it's life versus death, life versus aging, right? We have this whole anti-aging thing. Stay young at all costs, right? Look, the reality is death is one of the chapters of a full life. It's not the opposite of life.
Yeah.
Do you get that?
Totally.
So if we were to start to embrace death as one of the chapters of my life, it is coming. As I say, it's a 10 out of 10 stat. It's coming to every single person. And so if we were to embrace it and go, well, this shit's coming. Whether I like it or not, this is going to happen. Sorry, I just swore. That this is going to happen. That, okay, how do I get myself educated? How can I make choices? How can I have conversations with my family? How can we work through this together so we can walk into this with our eyes open? And as you said, Julie, be empowered in this experience.
Yeah, totally.
Rather than a victim to it,
yeah, and that's it. I can't imagine having my my choices removed from me. And as a nurse, I've certainly seen those things happen. So just changing the track there for a little bit now. So when I'm thinking about the different states in Australia, I'm thinking about people aren't going to know things like how when do you ring a doctor? How long can people stay at home before you have to send them to a funeral director, or do you need a funeral director? Do you have to get a doctor into the house? Like what does all of that look like, and is there much difference between the states in Australia?
Look, yes, there is difference in the states. Let's start with Victoria. That's where I live, and it's also probably the most unlegislated. Not to say there isn't legislation, but it's the least, I guess, restrictive. So in Victoria, for example, and a lot of people don't know these things, when a person has died, if they've died at home or even after death and they died in an aged care facility, for example, or in a hospital, you can take your person home and care for them at home, their body. Obviously, there's safety things about that. We need to make sure that the body is kept cool. There's other things. It's not something to just randomly do. It's something to be planned and organised. I want to really stress that. But a person can be cared for at home. In Victoria, there is no time limit on the amount of time a person can be kept at home after death. Again, as long as they're kept safe and their body is being cared for appropriately. And also, too, that as long as that is safe for the family. right? Commonly, often people talk about this magical sort of 3-day thing. Libby Maloney from Natural Grace, who I know you've had on, talks about there's often these 3 days where people have their person at home and then they're ready. Because if you think about it, when a person dies, that's a shock. And even if I know my person is going to die, I've been in hospital by their bedside for days, waiting for this final thing to happen. When it does, it's something that's often still a shock for the family or for the person because it's beyond their control, right? So to be able to take their person home, or if the person dies at home, and care for them and tend to them, then after a period of time, if I'm the person who's looking after them, and I'm the family person, after a few days, I've had time to accept their death, to adjust to their death, to care for them, to spend my love on them, caring for them. Then I'm often like, okay, you know what? I'm ready now to let my person go. And that might be when they might go to a funeral director. If they do. See, in Victoria, you don't have to use a funeral director. There are 3 laws that are common around Australia, which is that there must be a medical certificate of cause of death signed by a doctor. And if there isn't a doctor that can do that, or a death was unexpected or unexplained, then that person may need to go to the coroners to establish the cause of death. Like the gentleman I was just speaking about earlier, because he died suddenly and unexpectedly, he needed to go to the coroners for the coroner to determine what is the cause of death. So either one of those documents, medical certificate of cause of death or coroner's release form. The second law is that the person's body must be disposed of in a legal manner. Now, generally in Australia, there are some various methods. A lot of people don't know about that, but there are, the most common is cremation or being buried. But these days, there's natural burial in natural burial grounds. So again, there's this whole now eco-friendly and sustainable options. A lot of people don't know about that. And that's increasingly important to people in today's world, right? Then the third law is that the death must be reported to births, deaths, and marriages. So they're the 3 universal laws across Australia. Each state has some other nuances in there. For example, in New South Wales and Queensland, you can only keep your deceased person at home for 5 days after death. Here in Victoria, we can have a shrouded cremation. In other words, the person doesn't have to be in a coffin. People don't know that. Whereas in New South Wales, the funeral director, must be present when the person is encoffined, as in placed in their coffin. So do you get what I'm saying? There's some nuance, but so there's things to know, but there's a lot more flexibility than people know, Julie.
Yeah, for sure.
And and so that people, it's like doing this research. It's actually quite fascinating, And now, of course, there's also the voluntary assisted dying, which has got different names, and the laws around that are different again in each state as it's progressing and rolling out. So that can often be something in the mix for people as well.
Yeah. So, really, depending on what state you're in, you just need to find out what the real rules are and the real laws. And then there's a lot more flexibility and choice in there than what people say. So, Helen, would you say that people dying at home, does that help the grieving process for others, you think?
100%. 100%. Because when a person is in a hospital and an aged care, and I want to just pay due respect here to palliative care staff and also aged care staff, they do their very, very, very best. But they have an agenda, and their agenda is providing, it's got a clinical background to it, right? And correctly, that's as it should be. The thing about taking care of your person at home, you've got time to be with your person. You're not on restricted hours. You're not constantly having nurses and doctors coming in and saying, can you please leave the room while we do this, that, and the other thing? Just so you know, you never need to do that. They might ask for that, but you don't have to leave your person if you don't feel comfortable doing that. I just want to really make that point.
Good point.
I don't. I'm like, no, thank you. I'll stay, And, so to me, it's about, you asked about them grieving. what I know 100%, I see this over and over and over again. And this is even using the example of the person who died recently,